Block. Dodge. DR. In a player's first GURPS game, the 4 defenses lived in harmony. Then, the Dex and Health Gougers attacked with their infinite dodges. Only one module can save their game. In the brief overdramatic intro, you saw just one example of a game's balance potentially being ruined, all because they didn't know about one rule from GURPS martial arts. And I mean, it's not their fault for not knowing. It's not like the suggested rules frameworks are jumping right in your face like the average Ubisoft HUD. It takes some trial and error to learn these things. It's only natural. This video will pretty much be a combat survival guide for GMs to use to exploit their players' weaknesses, and for players to make better use of their characters' skill sets, not for the purpose of making the best character, but for making your already established character become the best they can be. So let's get started with the easiest defense option, the dodge. When I say dodging is easy, I don't mean that it's particularly reliable. What I do mean is that no matter what, every character starts out with a dodge score. Your dodge is based on your basic speed, adding 3 after dividing your combined dexterity and health by 4. So your starter character with no spent points is going to start off with a measly dodge score of 8. How exactly does this defense cause any problems? We'll get to that. But either way, your dodge score is going to improve in the process of building your character's stats. Say I'm making a particularly hardy dwarf named Baldrin the Bold. He's not really what you'd call a quick fellow, but he definitely knows his way around combat. I'll increase his dexterity by 1 and his health by 3. And oh, look at this. His dodge score has already increased by 1. I didn't even have to think about his dodge score, and it still increased.
We're rich!
Sure, you can increase it individually by purchasing base speed or enhanced dodge, but what I'm getting at is that it's accessible for pretty much all character types. So how does a dodge work in actual play? Well, like the rest of the active defenses, if an opponent successfully hits you with an attack you are able to defend against, you can roll against the relevant active defense value. Dodging enjoys a good amount of freedom, having a couple of variants like Sacrificial Dodge, where you opt to move in the way of an attack targeting an ally, or Acrobatic Dodge, where you can use your Acrobatic Skill or Acrobatic Dodge technique to gain a +2 on your dodge that turn. There's also the Retreat action, where you can elect to move 1 step backward when being attacked once per turn. This is available to both blocks and parries, but making a dodge while retreating grants a +3 compared to a +1 for the others. The real boon of dodge, however, is the fact that GURPS basic states you can essentially dodge as many times as you want within a turn. This can get especially egregious when stacking the bonuses I spoke about before, and might be really frustrating for a GM that may not know how to deal with it. So how do you balance against dodge scummers? If you read the page of GURPS martial arts I put in the video's intro, you may already have the right idea. All you need to do is add a cumulative -1 penalty on consecutive dodges made in a turn. This makes it so dodges aren't inaccessible for lower point characters, but higher level characters will need to vary their defenses or risk being hit. This way you can balance a character with high dodge by pitting them against a mob of weaker enemies if they get too aggressive in combat, or by keeping them on their toes with many ranged attacks. Another more natural check for dodges is a player's encumbrance. If they want to be well armored, they're going to dip into lower encumbrance levels at a -1 per each level. Building someone towards dodging means they have to take a good deal of risk if they manage to get hit. If you have a character that consistently makes retreat actions on their turn for the +3, and you don't know how to deal with it, here's some good ways to play around it. Retreats are hard to punish, but only if you're playing on a flat featureless field and fighting against one enemy. One key fact about a retreat is that no matter what, you have to move 1 yard away from your enemy. If there's a wall behind you, you're shit out of luck. What's even worse is if there's another enemy near the hex you're moving into. It can really be disastrous for a player if the GM plans it right.
Why is everyone stabbing me in the back?
Because you keep stepping in my hex. Stand and fight, Craven.
All in all, dodge is most easily used as a supplementary defense in addition to one of the other active defenses. Let's move on to the next active defense type, the parry. Both parries and blocks differ from dodges in that their active defense values are based on their skills. So in this case, your parry score is your melee skill divided by 2 plus 3. Parrying is likely going to be your highest active defense as a melee combatant, because upgrading your main offensive skill also means upgrading your parry score. This means that if you set a starting skill limit for your campaign, it's not as likely to go out of hand as it is with dodging. It's still important that you know the strengths and limitations of it. So let's dive in. It's important to know that while you can parry melee or thrown attacks, anything else is off the table, including arrows. You'll need to take a skill called Parry Missile Weapons in order to do that. To parry bullets, you'll need that skill in conjunction with Enhanced Time Sense, and even then, you're at a -5 to do so. GURPS Basic applies a baseline -4 penalty to consecutive parries in a single turn, so you won't just be able to parry your way out of everything. However, there are ways to reduce this penalty. The first way is to use a fencing weapon. If you see a weapon stat line with an F in the parry column, that means it has the fencing trait. This means your penalty is halved. The same goes for taking Weapon Master, so naturally, if both bonuses are combined, then you only have a penalty of -1. Pretty busted, right? Fencing weapons do have weaknesses of their own, though. Your encumbrance level is subtracted from your parry score, and you're straight up unable to parry flails. If the fencing trait made you look over at the weapon tables to look for what qualifies as a fencing weapon, you may have seen some other stuff there, like a number or even a U. The number is what you add to your parry score, so if it's negative, that means it's less effective. The U stands for unbalanced. Unbalanced weapons cannot both attack and parry in the same turn. Because not all weapons are made equal for parrying, it may be useful for a character's build to wield an offhand weapon solely made for it, such as a main gouge or a fist weapon. This way, if they use weapons that are unbalanced, or if they make committed attacks often, they can also have a good parry score to fall back on. If you're picking out this playstyle, you should remember the fact that using an offhand will give you a -4. In order to buy off that penalty, you'll need either ambidexterity or offhand weapon training. Another combat option that characters can use to boost their parries is taking a defensive grip. In regards to how it boosts your defenses, it grants you a +1 to parry an opponent from the front, but a further -1 to parry them from the sides. In fact, with parries and other active defenses, gaining an advantage by attacking from certain directions is important to consider. Let's get into an example combat situation with two opposing fighters. This armed skeleton is approaching our player character inside an abandoned town. Right now, it's the skeleton's turn to act. The skeleton moves up to make a ferocious and wild strike. It takes an all-out attack, moving half of its movement speed to get in range of its target. The player is able to parry normally, and the combat moves on from there. But if the skeleton instead moved to the hex on the player's left side, instead of on the side of their sword arm, they'd be unable to parry with their blade. This is because if you're wielding a one-handed weapon on one side, you can't parry an attack that comes from the opposite side of your body. If she had been wielding it in the defensive grip position, which involves placing two hands on it, she would have been able to parry that attack. Positioning is another important factor of why dual wielding or an offhand parrying weapon is important. In addition to another parry score, you get more coverage. Parrying in general is a staple defense for low-tech characters, but do remember to consider your character's skill, weapon of choice, and positioning to make the best use of it. And for GMs, you'll be able to poke holes in their defenses by playing on the limitations I've mentioned before. Now let's get into the last active defense type, blocking. As I mentioned before in the pairing section, your block score is calculated based on the appropriate skill, whether it be shield or cloak skill divided by 2 and then adding 3. However, it's not just another layer of defense. There's some key differences you need to be aware of. This would be the shield's innate defense bonus, or DB for short. In order to conceptualize what a shield's DB actually does for your character's defense, let's imagine an enemy right in front of us. Now, let's put a shield on them. Do you notice how the total coverage on this person's body has depleted? That's what DB represents. Each shield tool will have a DB level that you add to all active defenses you make when wielding it. That's right, you don't even need shield skill to reap the bonuses of its DB. Just know that the higher the DB and coverage it offers, the heavier and more cumbersome the shield becomes. So what about the act of blocking itself? Well, shields for one defend normally as far as rolls go, but they're also able to block projectiles like arrows. However, GURPS Basic limits blocking to only once per turn. There is an optional rule that changes this in martial arts at a cumulative -5 for each block. Typically, you're going to wield a shield in your offhand, but thankfully there's no penalty to skill for handedness due to blocking being considered a simple enough action. So how do you prevent blocking and a shield's DB from getting out of hand?
Oh, riot shield! I'm a pussy that use riot shield!
Well, shields also suffer a similar positional problem like with one-handed weapons. The side hex opposite of the shield is unable to be blocked, and gains no DB bonuses to defense in addition to any other penalties. Another way to balance overuse of shields is by breaking them. If you block an attack, or otherwise succeed on an active defense because of your defense bonus, there are rules that apply to damaging shields to the point of them being unusable. Shields have HP and DR like any other object, and once they're reduced to 0 HP and fail their health roll of 12, they're unable to be used.
Fuck your shield, bitch.
Another weakness of blocking is that if you're wielding a large shield, you're going to suffer a -2 to weapon skill unless if you take a perk called Shield Wall Training. Shields can be a very potent defense option given that you understand when and how to use them, or else you may just be holding on to a whittled piece of debris. If you're confident to dip into higher encumbrance levels, shields are really going to be a saving grace for you. And now for the final core defense type, armor. I may have made some of you grumble a little bit by including damage resistance in with the active defenses when it's more of a passive defense. Was it because I wanted to get a fourth topic for the Avatar intro? Partly, but also because I feel like it's important to include it in this video about GURPS's many defenses. Because what do you do when your other defenses fail you? Well, mainly you sit there and take a hit.
Oh, fuck.
The armor system in GURPS isn't folded in with the rest of your defenses in one score, it's considered when calculating damage. So in some cases, your characters can look like this.
Yikes! Fuck! No! Oh, he's invincible!
So to put it simply, pieces of armor are going to have a damage resistance score, DR for short. That number is what is subtracted from any incoming damage that hits that region. So if I'm hit with an attack that deals 4 damage, and I'm wearing armor with a total DR of 5, then I'm dealt 0 damage. If the attack has a wounding modifier, like if it's a cutting or impaling attack, those damage multipliers are done after DR is subtracted. You may find yourself wanting to layer different armor pieces to combine their DR. This is allowed, but every next layer you put on makes you suffer a -1 to dexterity, except if you layer on your head. And yes, I've heard the tirade about how medieval knights could move really fast in suits of armor. Sure, it's not like being over 100% weight limit in Dark Souls, but you tell me if you feel any more dexterous wearing 50+ pounds of armor in addition to any other gear. If anything, GURPS Low-Tech has a recourse for this, where layering in select areas only affects dexterity for those specific spots. Now that we're on this topic, the sheer weight of armor is something to consider when getting it for your character. The more armor you put on, the more your mobility and other active defenses suffer. And that's the least of your worries. You may not be able to afford higher-end armors, especially in lower tech levels. Armor in their respective tech books tend to be really costly, and players may spend a majority of their money to get a good chest or headpiece. Some players may not care at all for these disadvantages, and will simply take them in stride, knowing that damage negation is good enough for them. They'll spend all the money they can and take some basic lift to help move a little more. How do you deal with such characters? If you haven't already exploited their lowered mobility, make sure you have intelligent enemies target the locations where they're not armored. In addition, consider weapons with armor divisors, like bodkin arrows or armor-piercing ammunition. If you're playing a fantasy game, there are certain attacks or spells that will ignore DR entirely. All in all, armor is your insurance. You will get hurt in a campaign, and it may make the difference between a major wound and a death save. Alright guys, that's going to be all for this video. While I hope you learned something while watching, this is in no way a replacement for the official rulebooks. Please read up on the page references I've listed below, as they pertain to what I've talked about and will have more specific rulings depending on the situation. And while you're here, if you haven't subscribed already and want to learn more about GURPS, then please do so. I'm going to have more tutorials like this one, along with videos of actual GURPS play in the future. Thanks for getting this far in the video, and I wish you well in whatever you do with this great system.